So we started on Thursday the sugya of Lodos, and we are on page Vav. On the left column in the middle of the page, it's the Os Gimel. And we said that Vlad Bale Mumim Karev Huli Atzma, that even though the mother could not be brought on the Mizbeah because she is a Balas Mum, but nevertheless, since the Vlad is a Tamim, and you were Memir with a Maisa Tmura from the Baal Mum onto the Vlad, or even if you didn't do a Maisa Tmura, the Vlad itself is a Vlad Kodshim, and the Vlad is a Tam. So it's Karev B'fnei Atzma. You could be makriv on the Karbon. And then in the next paragraph, we said that Vlodos shenoldu li'em balas mum shekodam muma lekdesha. So at the moment that he was Magdish, the mother, she was already a balas mum. And then the Vlad was born before the pigeon of the mother. So the Vlados are Kedoshim B'Kedushas Damim Bilvad, because that's the status of the mother. She never had Kedushas Haguf. So from the get-go, when you acknowledge the animal, which was a Palestine, her status is that of Kedushas Damim. The Vlad, therefore, shares that identical status of Kedushas Damim. And the Chiddush here is that even though the Vlad is a Tam, nevertheless, it's subject to Pidyon. Normally, in Kodshim, there's no such thing as Pidyon, but here the Kedusha is a Kedusha's Damin. So what difference does it make whether it's a Tam or a Balas Mum? It would make one bit of a difference. Vlado shenoldu li'em Balas Mum shekodem ekdeshel amuma. Now we have a case where he was Magdish the animal when it was a Tam. Now it became a Balas Mum. Vinis Abra. And now the Parah became pregnant, and she gave birth to a calf. Is ha'im li'acher pijono, the Vlad. Now I'm not sure what the word li'acher. You have the word li'acher there. So we're talking about V'nis Abra ha'im li'acher pijono. So, in other words, the status was that the mother had Kedushas Domim, Kedushas Mizbeach. Then it became a Balas Mum, and now she became pregnant. But after she became pregnant, they were Poder, the mother, which means she was a Balas Mum, which is Psula Mikdash, that lends itself to Pidyon. And then the Vlad is born. So on the one hand, the Vlad was born before the Pidyon. Had there not been a Pidyon, we said that the Vlad of a Baal Mum would be Karev Liatzma, but there was a Pidyon before the birth. So you would have said, well, wait a minute, okay, it's true that there was a Pidyon before the birth, but the conception took place before the Pidyon. So that even if one second. So what does it depend on? Does it depend on Nisabra, on the Ibur, or does it depend upon the Laban? So now he's saying that in this case of a Balas Mum, it doesn't depend. One second, this Abra. So at the time of the Ibur, it was before. So again, if the Ibur took place before the Pidyon, then the Vlad, it seems, if I'm reading this correctly, would have the status of what we call Kedushas Damin. But in this case, the Ibur took place after the Pidyon. Now, basically, I mean, this is an oversimplification. Once there was Pidyon, then Paka Kedushasa. she doesn't have any kedusha because the pigeon transfers the kedusha onto the moles. And then she became a muberes. So as far as the history of that Vlad never had kedusha, because already at the time of the ibur, it was already after the pigeon. Now there may be still vestige of kedusha even after pigeon, but that's not something that transfers over to the Vlad. So the Vlad is mamish chulin. But the implication here would be that ibur is kovea. The shas ibur is critical, which means that if the ibur took place before the pigeon, which would be the subject of the next paragraph, then the Vlad in its mother's womb, even before birth, would be considered kadosh. I mean, again, kedusha is dominant, and it would require pigeon. It's not food. And in the footnote, he says this is a sugya mesechted b'choros, and a Rambam in Isurim is bad. So let's now go through the other case where the ibur took place before the pigeon of the mother. Vlado shenoldu le'eim balas mum shekodam hekdesh kodam hekdesha as muma v'nis abra kodem pigeon. So the mother is now a balas mum, and if let's say she would give birth now, then the Vlad would be what? Let's go over it one more time. Would be karev. Would be karev l'mizbeach. But what happened? The ibur took place before the pigeon. The leda took place after the pigeon. Arei Vlad kadosh, v'eino yochol lipados. So I don't know. I was anticipating that Allah would be that in this case is karev hu liatzmo, but no, he's not saying karev hu liatzmo. Why? Because there was a pigeon before the leda. So we're in that twilight zone. It's like a Bein Hashmashos case. On the one hand, at the time of the ibur, there was no pigeon, which would mean that it would be the same thing as we spoke about earlier at the beginning of Gimel, of a Vlad Bali movement, which is karev. But on the other hand, before the Leda, there was already a pigeon. So there's a kedusha here that is like in between. Do you follow what I mean? It's not a full-fledged kedusha l'mizbeach because there was a pigeon before the Leda, but on the other hand, at the Shas Ibur, there was no pigeon of the mother, and therefore it should come under the halacha of Vlad Bali movement, which is karev. So what's the law in this case? He says, "Ein b'koach duchaso litvos es pigeona." Which sounds like he's saying the pigeon would not be meaningful, would not be effective. But he doesn't tell you what. So what do you do, Lamaisa? In the footnote, he says, "Isur kedusha savlad midrabanan." Midivya tosus dira shekidushaso minatorah. I'm not sure what he means by midrabanan. What would be the rabbanan? If we're talking about a case where the ibur was before the pigeon, so what are the rabbanan saying over the Yoldo Achar? I guess he's saying in the name of Rashi that midaraisa, everything should depend upon the leda. And since the leda was after pigeon, then the Vlad has no kedusha, as we said before. In the case of this Abra, liachar pigeon, and here it's noldo liachar pigeon, and that's enough to make it into chulin on a deraisa. But the Rabbanon said that since the Ibur took place before the Pidyon, therefore it does have a vestige of Kedusha. And that's only the Rabban. So ha'em adayin uberes odem pijona fu omed liftosa. So at this point, the mother has not yet given birth, and the pigeon has not taken place, and it's called the omed liftosa. In other words, he's about to do the pigeon. So it sounds like to me, although he intended to do the pigeon, but the mother jumped the gun and she gave birth before the pigeon. Nechlaku amarayim im yesh takana leflad al yidei sheyakdish es ha'ubar bi osa kedusha shala'en. I think he means before the late. So he's being makdish the ubar b'mei ima, and he says, I want to declare that the ubar should have the identical kedusha as its mother. Now he has a separate Maisa Kiddush when he was Magdish the Vlad. That's according to one opinion in the Gemara. Where is this Gemara? I assume it's in Bechoros. Oh, now we get the second opinion. She'en takana el b'misas havlad. In such a case, we don't consider it as a Maisa Akdosha unto itself, and therefore there's no possibility of being mitake in this fly. You just have to wait, I guess, till it dies. But la'alacha he paskins yesh lo takana behegdesh kodem pijona imo. So let's see if we can just make a little bit of a summary of this last paragraph. So we have a case where the Ibur took place. The Ibur took place. Second, I just want to say again. So the Ibur took place before the pigeon. And we said that since the Ibur took place before the pigeon, therefore either midrabanan or midaraisa, that's a machlokas Rash Tosfos, there's no possibility of pigeon when the flood is born. Can we rectify the situation and offer a possibility of pigeon by doing a separate Maisa Hakdosha on the Uber? According to one day in the Gemara, this is a perfectly good takana. This will work and this will be effective. He can be Makadish the Uber before it's born in such a way that now it lends itself to pigeon. On to the other man, no. There's no such thing as a separate Maisa Kiddush on a Vlad b'mei ima. While it's in its mother's womb. Okay. Vlado shenoldu li'em balas mum shekada muma es hekdesha liachar pijona. So again, what happened here is that the mother was a balas mum. He was magdish the mother, so therefore she only gets a kedusha as damim, and then he was poder the mother. So the Vlad now is chulun, but he adds a chiddush. Afilu nis abra aim lifnei pijona. So that lechor is a little bit more complicated because we had one man that says it all depends upon Shas Ibur, and the Shas Ibur was before the pigeon, when the mother still had a kedusha at least of damim, and therefore that kedusha's damim should be transferred over to the Vlad. Lados shenis abru kodem shenafal mum the imam, benafal mum the imam kodem shenoldu. So now the mother became a balas mum between pregnancy and birth. Yesh min achronim shekasav shavlad karev Kedin Tomim L'Divrei HaKol. In other words, since the move took place after the Ibur, so when did the Zevlono Shenis Abru Kodim Shenofim, right? So the Ibur took place before the move, but she became a Balas Mum, the mother, before the Later. So according to one of the Achronim, I don't know, does he tell you who it is? The Minchas Chinuch. According to the Minchas Chinuch, in such a case, everybody agrees that the Vlad is current. Vlad Ola Utmurasa. Mafresh Nekeva Li'ol. Do you remember we had this discussion because an Ola requires a Zoch. So he was Mafresh in Nekeva. The Yolda Zoch. And now this Nekeva gave birth to a Zoch. Now I would ask the following question: Was the mother pregnant at the time of the Akdosha? Because then maybe the Akdosha would be Chal on the Vlad. Well, let's see how he develops. And here we have to go over to Daf Zayin. Nechluku bazeh tanoim. The Das Chachamim Yira Achi Stoyev. So it sounds like we're not, according to Chacham, we're not willing to give the Vlad the status of an Olam. But L'das Rabbi Elazar Vlad Atzmo Karev Olam. Alocha Kechacham. So let's just take a little bit of take a shot, I guess. What would be the logic to generate a Kedushas Ola, that's Rabbi Elazar, onto this Vlad? Again, we're going to have to, I think we once mentioned this before, that the gender of the Vlad, of the mother, as far as the Ma'aseh HaKadosh, Ola, is only a ma'akik. I mean, I'd love to know what you do with the mother. Because the Chacham are arguing about the Vlad. Machlokes Tanoim is the status of the Vlad. What's the status of the mother? I mean, she's obviously not brought on the Mizbeach. No, in other words, pedagogically, he left out the Ikir Chosim and Sefer notes before I can analyze the issue of the status of the Vlad. Tell me what's the status of the mother. I don't know. Do you see anything? All right. Hamir Karban Ola b'behema schulin nekeva. So he's got a Karban Ola, which is a Zachar, and he's got a behema schulin of a nekeva. And now he does a Tmura from Ola to Chulin nekeva. Yolda behema satmura Zachar. So the Tmura itself could not be brought on the Mizbeach because it's a she. But she gave birth, this is already a grandchild, so to speak. She gave birth to a Zachar. So would the Tmura somehow skip a generation and go from the Ola to the son of the Karban Chulin Nekeva? Nechluku Bazel Moran Das Rabbi Bar Chana Shedin Ze Shoni Machlokes Chacham Rabbi Elazar B'mafrish nekeva li'ola, the Yolda Zocha. So it's Rabbi Lazar who holds, like we said before, that the nekeva is just an ikuv. It's like an external barrier or impediment, but there is some kedusha that's fell through the hakdasha, and now it's transferred over to the zachar that was the vlad of the nekeva. Chachamim hold yira ad she'istoya, that somehow the vlad, even according to Chachamim, has some residue of kedushas mizbeach, not a full kedushas mizbeach, and we can't bring it on the mizbeach, but yira ad she'istoya. So according to Rabbi Bar Chana, in our case, where the behemoth chulin, which was the tmura, what do we call it in English, the substitute, now gave birth to a zachar, the status of that zachar, whether or not it's karev as an ola, depends on Rabbi Lazar or the Chacham, because Rabbi Lazar says that the vlad of an nekeva in ola is karev ola. So here he was meimir onto a nekeva, but the vlad of that nekeva, if it's a zachar, will be brought on the mizbeach as an ola. So again, magically, somehow the tmura is chal vis-a-vis the vlad, which is in this case turns out to be a zachar. Therefore, the korban is ola al gabi mizbeach as a korban ola. But according to the Chachamim, that the vlad of an olas nekeva, even though it's a zachar, is yirat she'istayev, then the same halacha will apply here in tmura. Basically, I think what we're seeing here in Rabbi Bar Chana is an equation between vlad and tmura. That just like according to Rabbi Lazar, you can have a vlad in the next generation. So the original akdasha on the nekeva is not valid, but somehow, if that nekeva gives birth to a zachar, the zachar vlad will pick up the kedushas ola mizbeach, and the same thing will apply in tmura. When you did a tmura from an ola onto a nekeva, somehow that tmura transfers over to the next generation, to the vlad, who's a zachar. Now we get to Das Rava. Rava holds that l'divrei hakol hu atzmo karev ola, means even according to the Chachamim, whose position was that if you're mafresh in a nekeva for ola, the vlad is not nikrav, it cannot be karev al gabi mizbeach, even though it's a zachar. However, in the case of tmura, according to Rava, even the Chacham will agree that the tmura, which is a zachar, is karev ola. What does that mean? Why would tmura be more powerful than Leila? See, I can understand this maybe if the animal was muberes, but he doesn't mention that she was muberes. Hemer korban ola bebehemas chul in the keva, the yolda behemas hatmura zocha. Rava says l'direi hakol hu atzmo karev li ola. Huf chav tet. No, he's just quoting the Gemara. The Mishnah. Yeah, let's just think. If you were magdish in a keva as an ola and it gave birth to a zohar, then that zohar is not brought on the mizbech. But if you were meimir from an ola onto an akeva, then the vlad, if it's a zachar, I guess I don't know why. Maybe this Rava derives from psukim. There's a separate halach in Tmura that Tmura is chal on the vlad. If it cannot be chal on the mother, then because she's in the keva, then it'll be chal on the vlad. Halacha pasuk Rambam Rava sha'af al pi shepasak chacham shevlad ha'olah. Meaning, if he was magdish in the cave, Eino Karev Liatzmo, Mikol Makom, Vlad Atmura Karev Liatzmo. Doesn't give you any explanation from Rav. Just says the Ram passes like this. Vlad Osham. So a person was mafresh Ein Keva Li Osham. Once again, an Osham, like a carbon ola, has to come in as chari. The Yolda Zachar. So this is the identical case that we had before in Chatos, but now we have it in Osham. I don't know why things would change. Let's see the Das, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Chanina, Ein Avlad Karv Liatzmo, Lo Osham, the Lo Ola. Right, an ola could come from an akeva. You want to double check me on that? But he wasn't makdishis as an ola; he was makdish as an osha, and an akeva cannot be an osha. And Rabbi Yossi here seems to be reflecting the sheet of the chacham that we had before by chatos, and the vlad is not karev liatzma. It can't be an ola. Ola. Oh, even an Ola is in there? Oh, wait a minute. Right. I'm sorry, I got a little confused. Right. I don't know why he mentions Ola in this. We're talking about carbon Osha. Mafresh Nikevali Asham. Why is that different than a Chatos? I don't know. He says, Ein Avlad Karv Liatz. That's Rabbi Yosef. Now, what about Rabbi Elias? Rabbi Lazar. Mafresh Nikevali Ola V'Yod Zachar Avlad Atzma Kariva. But not in the case of Mafresh Nikevali Asham. Again, I'm insisting that these are derived from psukim. You can't just say svaras, in the Latin the Velta. Right? Well, das Rabbi Ovin Bar Chia, so shitas Rabbi Lazar Karev Hu Liatzmo Ola. Now that's pretty mind-boggling, is it not? He was mafresh in the keva for an osham, and now we're going to say that the vlad itself is a carbon ola. Now, l'shitas hasober she'eno karev uli atzmo, which is Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina. The Vur Barama she'ad shelo hikriv es hashamo. He's chayav a korban osh. He was mafresh in the cave, so he can't bring that in the cave as an osh. Now that the cave gave birth to his zachar, but we're going according to Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina, ein avlad karv liatzma. So what do we do with this blood, which is a zachar? So the Rambam says, "Ashlo hikriv Hashem yirad sheistayed, v'mocher v'yavi pidamav osha." But im kvar karev Hashomo, mocher b'mumo Ipol Domav the Nidvas Olam. So the question is, when this vlad of a Zohar, which is a Zohar, becomes a Balmum, what do you do with a Balmum? So you sell it on the open market, which is a kind of a pigeon, but what do you do with the money? And it depends. If the Baal has not yet brought his korban asham, he's still chayv in an asham with that outstanding obligation, then the monies that come in after the animal becomes a balmum will be earmarked for a korban asham to fulfill his obligation. If, on the other hand, he's already purchased an asham and brought it on the mizbeach, then when we sell the vlad that's a zachar, after it became a balmum, then the monies will go for a korban adam, which is a davas ola. Okay, so let's make a note of where we got up to here. Muras on page 9. Okay then. Now, 1 second. How do you get out of a full screen? I don't know how I got into this. You could press these. That doesn't work. Oh yeah, maybe it did work.